Hi, I'm Mark Small. I'm an Indianapolis attorney. This is a show called Civil Discourse Now. My co-host is Paul Ogden. We're broadcasting to you, or netcasting to you, or however you refer to it, from Big Hat Books in Broad Ripple, section of the northern part of Indianapolis, Indiana. Big Hat Books is located at 6510 Cornell Avenue. It's a small business. It's got a good wide selection of books, including my book, Crime Pays, which is a fictionalized account of a Ponzi scheme that actually occurred in the late 1960s. Our guests today are Greg Fettig. He's a Tea Party activist, a small business owner, he's a lifelong Hoosier, and Luther Garcia, who's an Indianapolis criminal defense attorney. Topics we're going to discuss are, first of all, the first two segments, 15-minute segments, are going to be about the Tea Party movement, various aspects of it. Second topic we're going to be on is 9/11, whether bin Laden achieved the goals that Al-Qaeda had for that. Paul?
Thank you, Mark. Mark Small, of course, sits to the right of me, but he is in no way more conservative than I am. At least I don't believe he is. My name is Paul Ogden. I am also an Indianapolis attorney. I practice mostly in the civil area, but I do a little criminal work. This show is Civil Discourse Now. And I think the name speaks to what it stands for. Civil discussion about the issues. Too often shows talk over each other, they're yelling at each other, screaming at each other. We might do some of that today, but for the most part it's going to be civil, intellectual discussion about the issues. So I'm glad that you have joined us today, and hopefully you will find our show interesting.
And with that, Paul, you right-wing bastard, I turn to Greg. Greg's a Tea Party activist. Greg, what is the Tea Party as you understand it, or the Tea Party movement? I mean, there's no political party as such of the Tea Party. Am I correct?
That's correct. It's just it's a spontaneous movement that arose in early 2009. It actually was early February, and it sprung up at that point around February 27th. There was about 50-some Tea Party rallies throughout the nation. Now, when I got involved, I saw that, I liked it, but I got involved in mid-April, April 15th here downtown Indianapolis with that tax day rally. And what I think ignited it was, and you'll see as we discuss, I'm sure, it's the Tea Party's not just Republican. I'm a lifelong, or was a lifelong Republican, but we will actually go after members in our party as well as members in the Democratic Party. We're upset with the direction the party, or the country rather, has gone. It's not working right now. This recession, if you want to call that, we're in it for over 3 years now, and it's not just the current president's fault. Both parties have culpability in it, and we, through this movement, found that, yes, actually, we do have a voice in political discussions and being involved in this nation, which everyone actually has always had with their vote. But this gave us a venue to work collectively as a movement and fight back against unconstitutional issues that are occurring in this country.
Let me ask her a question if I can. One thing I've never been quite clear on, certainly I believe in many of the things the Tea Party believes in, not just about all of them, but I've always wondered about social issues. Are they focused more on the economic, fiscal issues? You get into social issues, immigration, abortion, all those type of issues. Do they have a position on that?
Well, there's two thoughts that originally sprung up on three principles for the Tea Party. Fiscal conservatism, free market capitalism, and limited government intrusion into the average person's daily life. Yet as the movement has grown, we're going on 2.5 years, it's morphed into more than that. And there are some that say we have to be purists in that regard, but others want to address the social issues. And that depends on where in the country. The Midwest, the South, they're more towards the social issues. For example, our governor, a lot of people in the Tea Party would consider him to be moderate, not conservative enough, because of his not wanting to address social issues.
Okay.
But by being kind of amorphous, it's a means by which that label of Tea Party can be used by people. It's kind of malleable. I mean, I know the Koch brothers have put a lot of money into like the Tea Party Express, and they've done things that are rather intrusive in terms of governmental actions, or they support in terms of governmental actions. And I think that's kind of antithetical to what's being traced. I mean, if you look at what they did in Wisconsin, for example, they're trying to intrude on a specific state's policies there in the General Assembly by dumping a lot of money from people who are out of state. I mean, they really
but that's a counterbalance to the union influence, which they even came to our state, plus people from all over the country back in March.
You know, the difference is there were actually union members there in Wisconsin, and I don't think the Koch brothers have a residence in Wisconsin.
That they support organizations, whether they're national and nationals, then trickle down to the local Tea Party groups. So yes, we have, when I'm here in Indiana, and I'm at the state capitol, and there's people from Florida, Kansas, all over the country being bussed in. That's no different, or actually it's worse, because they're coming in and they're taking over our capital. Now our side, we counter-protested, but we don't put the numbers up. They'll bus in 10,000, 20,000 people on a work day to take over our Capitol building to push issues that are important to them, and then the Koch brothers get accused of being, they're not real, they're astroturf. I don't see how you can argue that. Now they're conservative people, conservative businessmen, and they're investing in their beliefs that are conservative.
To the tune of billions of dollars, and part of the Tea Party platform, and this goes to what we were saying before we started the show today. I know people in the Tea Party movement are offended somewhat when people refer to them as tea baggers, but the actual first demonstrations of the Tea Party movement said we're going to teabag, and they actually used that expression in the announcement in 2009.
I don't know what a teabag is, but a teabagger is a derogatory sexual innuendo.
Well, some would think it was derogatory, but in terms of the tea bag itself, the idea was going back to the Boston Tea Party. Am I okay? Well, and that's something I think is antithetical in terms of the Tea Party movement itself as a movement. Is that the Tea Party movement announced itself as saying we were going to teabag things in ignorance of what teabagging meant as far as this term was concerned. Part of what people I perceive in the Tea Party as doing is they're wanting to move money out of public education. Whether you think it's good to have vouchers or not, they're wanting to take money out of public education, and I think in the long run that's bad for education. They learn out of ignorance that they've labeled themselves as something that might have derogatory implications, meaning teabagging.
But isn't, I hate to interrupt, but isn't that a derogatory term started by the left, like Keith Olbermann? Calling people teabaggers? No,
because they pointed out that really was a term. And see, here's the whole thing. The Boston Tea Party, they didn't make tea with bags then. Tea bags weren't developed until 1908. And the Tea Party itself was actually a very orderly thing in which the people were disguised and didn't want anybody to know what they were doing. They just dumped tea into a bag.
Let's bring Luther.
Yeah.
Well, the genesis of the Boston Tea Party, to me, actually does have a lot to do with this, in a couple of ways. One is the tea at the time was blocks. And those blocks of teas had the Queen's image stamped on them at the time, much like we stamped dollars. And it was England's largest export good. The reason the colonies revolted was not just the taxation issue. One of the largest issues they had was the fact that in Britain they would only import American unfinished goods and then re-import to the United States finished product, which means that all the value added for those goods took place in Great Britain and not in the colonies. And what I find ironic about the free trade argument and the Tea Party is that free trade now is the antithesis of the reason that we had that revolt, which is we don't want to export our raw materials and purchase finished goods, whereas free trade, unfettered free trade, which is what I think has been argued, goes to the lowest common denominator. That means countries that have no working condition requirements, low fees, low wages, etc., they are reaping the benefit of the finished good. We are exporting our raw materials. They are reaping the benefits, and the high value jobs, which used to be here, are no longer here. And it's because of the outsourcing. The limited number of people who make money off of that, oddly, are people who are in the shipping industry, like the Koch brothers, who have bankrolled from very early on this entire Tea Party movement, which I understand you believe is a spontaneous thing, but it's remarkable that the first genesis of the Tea Party movement took place on the floor of the commodities market by a personality for a very conservative, some might say a mouthpiece for the Republican Party news network. And then immediately upon the end of that speech, multiple websites registered to various unknown parties immediately sprung up, financed, in my opinion, entirely by extremely wealthy people to create a movement. Now, whether they've lost control of that movement over time, that's another question. But the genesis, I believe, is not just a spontaneous explosion.
You brought up the issue of free trade. I believe in free trade, but I'm not sure, you can correct me, Greg, if I'm wrong, has the Tea Party really taken a strong stand on free trade?
Well, you can't broad stroke it in. And we're not the Tea Party. That personality you mentioned, media personalities, Rick Santelli, that's an NBC network, which nobody would ever consider that a conservative network. He was angry.
I would too.
Pardon?
I would too. I would consider it conservative.
NBC?
I'm with
NBC, we consider it as left as you can get. So.
There are no left major media. Sorry.
Okay. Well,
that might be for another show.
That is.
But anyway, no, he would not consider to be our hero, but he got frustrated with the mortgage bailouts, the collapse of the housing industry, the government policy, which who he worked for would be more subscribing to that than we would, the Obama administration. He got out of anger. He said maybe it's time to have another Boston Tea Party. That's the genesis of the movement. Now, most people in the Tea Party originally that actually said they're Tea Party people, they use that as taxed enough already. It doesn't mirror exactly with the original Boston Tea Party. And in fact, that rose up over tax revolt. They got tired of the multiple taxes, which also we do. We're upset with that.
And actually, the Boston Tea Party occurred after the tax was lowered. It was cut in half. So the demonstration by the colonists occurred after Britain had taken a measure to alleviate the taxation on the colonists.
Well, again, we can argue about the Boston Tea Party, or we can argue about the modern day Tea Party. Now, not everyone is. There's more than just, it's a generic term now. It's just like Kleenex, which is a tissue, but everyone uses that name. There's 9/12 groups, there are liberty groups, but it's morphed into, everyone calls it the Tea Party movement. Nevertheless, we have three main issues that concern us, and as well as social issues are incorporated with more and more people, at least people of religious belief, Christianity in particular. So there's two, they're not arguing with one another, but it is maturing, the movement is maturing.
And I'm sorry, Greg, we're right at the end of the first segment. I didn't mean to interrupt.
RFQ, people in the city understand those terms.
And we're right at the end of our first segment. We'll be back in just a couple seconds.